Today, let's start our discussion by reading a passage from the book of John. John chapter 8, verses 2 through 11. Early in the morning, Jesus came again into the temple, and all the people were coming to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, and having set her in the center of the court, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in adultery in the very act. Now, in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. What then do you say?" They were saying this, testing him, so that they might have grounds for accusing him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground. But when they persisted in asking him, he straightened up and said to them, "He who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they began to go out one by one, beginning with the older ones, and he was left alone, and the woman where she was in the center of the court. Straightening up, Jesus said to her, "Woman, where are they? Did no one condemn you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "I do not condemn you either. Go. From now on, sin no more." Now, most of us have heard this account many times. And often, when someone is living a sinful lifestyle, some of us might be tempted to direct these last words we just read at the person who is sinning. Go and sin no more. The religious leaders brought the woman to a public gathering. It would have been shaming enough to do this in private, but they had come to shame her for the world to see. They ignored their own sins, and they pointed their self-righteous fingers at hers instead. But their only power to free her from sin was to put her to death. Now, we generally don't kill someone these days who is living in sin, but it's easy for us to harbor some level of condemnation toward them as we tell them, "Go and sin no more." Now, of course, ultimately, sin separates us from God. Sin was the reason Jesus had to die on the cross. Sin destroys families, it destroys relationships, it destroys nations, and it destroys the very soul of the one who practices it. And the sentiment, "sin no more," is repeated in many ways throughout the scriptures. But to the one who seems to feel as though they are completely powerless to stop a sin that holds them bound, "Go and sin no more" only serves as a spiteful reminder that they are indeed unable to do so. The thoughts in the mind turn those words into a mocking, judgmental voice inside the head. You are worthless, it might say, because you continue to do this thing. Now, we might find a small window of time in which we're able to abstain, but then that window closes, and we are left with even more shame than we had before because we have once again failed. Well, let's take a closer look at what might have been behind Jesus' instructions to go and sin no more. In John chapter 5, we read another account of an impossible order that Jesus gave. John chapter 5, beginning with verse 2. Now, there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool, which is called in Hebrew Bethesda, having 5 porticos. In these lay a multitude of those who were sick, blind, lame, and withered, and this part actually isn't in the earlier manuscripts, waiting for the moving of the waters, for an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred up the water. Whoever then first, after the stirring up of the water, stepped in was made well from whatever disease with which he was afflicted. Verse 5. A man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been a long time in that condition, he said to him, "Do you wish to get well?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I am coming, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your pallet, and walk." Immediately the man became well and picked up his pallet and began to walk. Go and sin no more. Get up and walk. Now, to the one bound by sin, the first one, go and sin no more, seems as impossible to follow as get up and walk is to someone who is unable to even get out of bed. And if we used the same approach and level of judgment for the physically ill as we do for those trapped by various sins, what a big bunch of lunatics we would obviously be. So there was something else going on there when Jesus told the woman to sin no more and when he told the man to get up and walk. You see, behind Jesus' words was supernatural power. He was not lost in the mind, attached to this world, identified with his form, or confused by a multitude of compulsive thoughts. His words were not like our words. There was power behind them, presence, a still rushing wind, a silent thundering voice, an earth-shattering calm. The power of which Jesus spoke that moves mountains is not a brute force or an act of our minds stirred up willpower. Instead, it is something that the mind cannot comprehend. And if you are inwardly still and silent, you just might hear his voice today. We might spend our whole lives searching for God's presence, listening for his voice, looking for his touch, asking the skies, "Where is he and when will I find him?" And all the while, he is right here. And he is here right now. But I can't see him, or I can't feel him, you might say. And so you either keep trying by doing this or not doing that. You keep trying to find him that way, experience him by what you do or don't do. Or you give up and you place your trying for him into that imaginary place called the future. While the whole time, the only way is to fully surrender. Not just on the outside, or in words or concepts in the head, but to the very center of your being. You can feel when you're fighting against things. There's this little bit of tension. Most of us feel it all the time, so we're not even really aware of it. It's in the background. It's what causes impatience, causes us to become irritated with other people, causes us to wish it was quitting time. It's that constant fighting, that inner struggle, that lack of surrender. But when you surrender to the very center of your being, that is where peace comes. And when you hear those wordless words speak to you from the innermost silence, rise up and walk, or go and sin no more. They are words of freedom, words of power. And then you can know that whatever he says to do or to not do, you are freed and empowered to obey his loving command. So, be at peace. Surrender to his hand. Rest in the fact that anything worth doing is done by his power. Not the power of your will or your might or your mind or your beliefs or your striving or your best effort. And as you rest with him in the temple of your body, in the time called now, without fighting, without striving, without that inner conflict, however subtle it might be, without attachments, without identifying with the things of this earth and the forms of matter and of mind, things that are all passing away, then you will hear him in the silence, in the noise, in the things that happen, that come and go. You will see his face everywhere you look. You will experience his presence everywhere in everything. And you will find that you are hearing and obeying his wordless voice with no striving, no struggling, really no real effort at all. That is what it means to be abiding in the vine. And you will be able to say from the very depths of your innermost being, it is no longer I who lives, but Christ who lives in me.